Good morning, everybody. My name is Dr. Soni Werner, and this is Freiburg, Maine. It's August 6th, and we're at the New Church Assembly. And our topic this week is about being kind to others. Let me introduce myself a little first. Not all of you know me. I'm a Swedenborgian psychologist. I've been a professor for a long time at a Swedenborgian college called Bernathen College. And it was my joy to try to bring Swedenborgian ideas and psychological ideas together. So I've written 5 books in that theme, and one of them is on altruism. I have books here if anybody's interested in buying one, discounted price. But I'm going to just share a few ideas. I also, on the website for Freiburg, I have put a few excerpts from my book. So what I'm going to do today and what I'm going to do tomorrow is I'm going to tell you a little bit about some ideas from the Bible, from Swedenborgian concepts, and from psychology. But I'd like to start with a story, and this will help me introduce a psychological idea, and then from that I'll go to some Swedenborgian ideas about how to be kind to others. So this is a story about my daughter. How many of you have ever been on a subway in a big city? Okay, can you picture yourself there? It's a crowded subway, New York City, and nobody talks to anybody, right? So Heidi lives in New York City, and she is in a crowded subway on her way to work, and everybody is protective of their own little space. Nobody makes eye contact, nobody touches anybody, it's just me and my bubble. Yes, I'm next to you, but so it's an unaltruistic space, right? So Heidi's right near the doors that go, right? So they stop somewhere in the underground of New York, and the door opens, and the only person that comes in is about 3 years old. She runs in, and the door's closed. And Heidi looks at this little girl, and the girl starts screaming and yelling in Spanish. Heidi does not speak Spanish. And nobody wants to do anything for this girl, but there's no parent around. The parent didn't get on the subway in time. The subway pulls away from the station. Now Heidi does know the network of where the subways go. She's done it every day. So she knows that although we're at a minor stop, in about 2 stops later, they'll be at a major stop, and their police are there, and they speak many languages. So she decides to befriend this little 3-year-old who is screaming, "Mama," and saying various words in Spanish that Heidi does not know what they are. It felt like an eternity, but subways do go fast. So within less than probably 10 minutes, they were 2 stops later. And Heidi by then has tried to comfort this little girl, tried to say soothing things, lullabies, anything she can think of to soothe this scared little girl who was without a parent or a guardian. And eventually she gets her hand and takes her over to the police, who then have some kind of network for dealing with lost children. Now let's just look at that little incident. Heidi will never forget that moment. It only took about 10, 20 minutes maybe. It was so intense, and trying to figure out, what should I do? It's not a life or death emergency, but it still felt like an emergency. So I'm going to now use a psychological theory about altruism to discuss that incident. And you could use this theory to describe almost any altruistic incident. The first thing is, how long did it take? How long did I say it took? 10, 20 minutes. Okay? So duration is just a description of length of time. In contrast, today I was having breakfast next to these fine people over here, and I was learning about how Nancy works in a library. How many years have you worked in a library, Nancy? 7. Okay, so that's another example of duration. That's her paid job, as opposed to Heidi was just doing something, trying to be neighborly to help a little girl who was in trouble. A few minutes. So sometimes we can describe an altruistic experience, whether it's short or long. It's pretty surface. It's not really deep. But it's one thing that we can say is, I've been a teacher for 20 years, or I've been helping out at this camp for 35 years. You know, we often refer to duration, don't we? Okay, intensity is another dimension that Sorokin, who's the psychologist, would use to describe an event. Now, do you think Heidi had an intense experience? Her heart was pounding. And she just didn't quite know what to do, but she felt a call. She had to do something. So intensity of emotion is another way to describe an altruistic experience, or how much emotion you devote to it. Let me refer to you. How many of you get to do a job that you love? And some days it might be intense, and other times it's a calm intensity over a period of time. Corey's just been ordained. He's just beginning. Hopefully he chose this profession and he's coming at it with all of his might. I'm at the end of my paid career. I've been working for almost 50 years, but I still get a chance to do some volunteer work. And I have different levels of intensity for the different things I do. Some I'm sort of neutral about, and some I'm really involved in. So intensity is a fascinating thing, hard to measure on a scale, but you certainly know what it's like when you're engaged in something or indifferent. Now, extensivity is a fascinating word. Extensivity means to what extent are you helping people who are like you? So, for instance, I was asking Trevor this morning, are you related to anybody here? And he said, almost everybody. He pointed out, that's his extended family. And we know from neuroscience of the brain that when you look at somebody you're related to, or like you have a 3-generation household, we were talking this morning, there's an extra love you have for people who are biologically like you, right? Extensivity at its extreme is when you're dealing with somebody who doesn't look like you, who you've never met before. Maybe they speak another language. Remember Heidi? She was dealing with a little kid who had a different culture, different first language. And so Heidi had to kind of think for a minute, am I responsible for somebody who is not like me? Yeah, they're in New York, but she doesn't speak English. I'm not related, I'm not responsible, I'm not her grandmother. So sometimes we have to go the extra mile. And there's actually neuroscientific studies on it takes a little longer for us to decide that we have empathy for somebody in trouble who is not like us. Raise your hand if you know the Good Samaritan story. Do you know that? The Good Samaritan was helping somebody who was part of a group that was considered an enemy. Very far on the extensivity timeline or continuum. So sometimes we just jump right in, like watching Dean follow the little toddler while you're busy. He's a grandfather. Of course he's going to follow him around while you're doing your thing. But when you're not related, it takes a little extra effort, and you have to decide if I'm going to do it or not. Another dimension is adequacy. And I think Dean talked about that today when he was referring to the tree that fell down. Did he have the adequate skills to be able to help get rid of that bad tree? Denise, you mentioned that learning. Sometimes you realize, I don't know how to do something, I need to go learn it. In my case, for instance, as a person who is now retired, I've decided to become a mediator. And I went to graduate school, got a PhD, but nobody ever taught me how to be a mediator. So I went back at age 62 and went and got some training. It doesn't matter how old you are, you can keep learning things, right? So that willingness to keep learning so that I will be more adequate. Now, yesterday when the guy who was the director here said, these are the people who know how to do first aid. You notice they didn't point to me? I know about Band-Aids, but that's about it. So I am not trained, I am not adequate as a nurse in any way. And I have not yet gotten myself trained in that area. Other people have said, I think I want to at least get CPR or something. So we can all decide, do I want to gain some adequate skills? And I think when we're in heaven, we get to keep going back to college and keep learning stuff. Free tuition. Heidi, in her story of the subway of New York, did not feel adequate in terms of speaking Spanish. But she did have adequacy. She knew the subway. She knew what the 3-year-old didn't know. There were police. There were going to be real helpers up there that were going to help get her back to her mama. Now, I love how psychologists really try to describe. So we've just done 4 different dimensions. And I give credit to Dr. Sorokin, who was at Harvard many years ago. And he came up with this descriptive, sort of on the surface, different aspects of being kind to others. But the fifth one he said very little about. And this is where I turn the corner and I bring in Swedenborg. And I bring in the Bible. Because I think we get into looking at purity of motives if we bring in a spiritual dimension. In my book, I organize it by looking at the famous story in Matthew 25:35, where it talks about 6 ways to serve our neighbor. And in a few minutes, I'm going to talk about 3 ways at both a surface or an external level, as well as at an internal level. But right now, I'd like to talk about a different part of the writings of Swedenborg, where it talks about how we can do self-examination of our own motives, from rather simple and rather selfish to hopefully more regenerate. And it could be a very private conversation that you might not tell anybody else. But it's good to keep doing it throughout our lives, whatever task we do. Why did I do it, and can I do it for more pure motives the next time? So, in the writings, these are my words that are an interpretation or a derived concept from what Swedenborg tells us about our purity of our motives when we're being helpful to others, when we're being altruistic to others. At the lowest level, we may simply want to give. Like, I'm going to go clean the bathrooms. I'm going to go get rid of that tree that fell in the river. I'm going to go sweep out that room so we can have childcare there. We just do it, hopefully with a good heart. But secretly, we're kind of hoping we're earning a place in heaven. You know, we want a reward. Maybe at the end of the week, somebody gives us a sticker that says, "You were a good camper, you helped." And we kind of like that. That feeds our ego, doesn't it? We all know what that's like. When I was a Girl Scout leader, I remember we'd give out little badges. Didn't you love those badges when you're a Boy Scout or Girl Scout? Or you win a race and you get to be known for a minute. And it builds our little self that I'm a helper. We get an identity doing that. So we start there. But Swedenborg challenges us and says, we can do more pure motives if we try. We don't necessarily need to be the great philanthropist of the year of San Francisco. No, we really can become more and more pure. And he says a very interesting psychological pattern that happens for most of us. The second one says, maybe your motives are to give to anybody who is in distress, regardless of whether they're your grandchild or your sister or somebody from a different culture or faith, anywhere on that extensivity continuum. You give to anybody who's in distress who needs you, but then you're shocked if they use your generous gift for something evil. So let's just think of an example. Imagine that I'm decided that I've got way too many peaches on my peach tree. And I decided to just put them out in a public place and say, free for the taking. And I'm feeling kind of good about it. Okay, I generously shared the peaches that the Lord grew, but I put them in a basket and I put them out there. And then I stand back and watch. And what if I notice that somebody takes them and then turns around and sells them and gets opiates, you know, or gets heroin, and I'm going, what? We're a little bit annoyed, aren't we? Okay, when somebody takes our generosity and then turns it into something that might be destructive in some place. And Swedenborg tells us it's pretty common. And we might get burned and say, I'm never giving money again to the Salvation Army. I'm never going to help them again. I'm never going to help them again. And we pull back. It's the beginning of using our discernment, our understanding about where should I be generous and with who. So it's a good beginning of the next stages. That we're trying to not be just, oh, I love everybody, like we said in the 60s. But instead start using an understanding heart and being more careful. So at first we might be sort of annoyed that they misused our gifts. Okay, third stage. Give generously only to those people that we think deserve it. Oops. Only those people that we think are moral, upright, worthy. And so we might decide, well, I'll only give to people in my church, or only give to people in my neighborhood, or only give to people who have the same race as me, or the same. And we might start using our discernment. The trouble is we might stereotype, and we might not give our time, our resources, our money to people who are different than us, and that extensivity might not happen. What I really appreciate is the more mature stage, according to Swedenborg. You search for what is good in another person. You support that part of them. You see God or goodness in that person. And you enjoy and appreciate that. This is where you're really developing that discerning, understanding heart. You're looking for even the smallest good, even in a difficult person. And then you give credit to God, not yourself. You're not looking for the badge. So, I'd like us to pause for a minute before I do my next section and just have a moment of public affirmations. So I'm going to start. Trevor, would you stand for a minute? I want to thank you for welcoming me, because this is my first time at this summer camp. Your songs, your sweet face, and you're just sitting next to me at some of the meals. Thank you. Does anybody else have somebody here who's done something specific either in the last couple of years or in the last couple of days that they can say one specific person and affirm and thank them? Floor's open. Yes, stand up.
Nina, thank you for always bringing music to camp and playing the guitar with me and everyone.
Wonderful. The Lord just flowed into both of them. Did you see? They could hardly smile hard enough. Wasn't that great? And, you know, it's coming through her and it's being received. You're both just lovely receptacles of the angels flowing through. And now you have that wonderful connection. Anybody else? Who else wants to thank somebody? Susanna.
Soni, I want to thank you for coming to speak with us and to share your gifts and to running the opening weekend program. Thank you very much.
Anybody else? Denise.
Paige, I want to thank you for your worship this morning and for your lecture. Thank you.
Wonderful. Let's do a few more. Yes.
Troy, thank you for always working in the kitchen.
Okay, your turn.
Martha, I want to thank you for my friends. You're my friend too.
Yes, you have one.
Yes, I want to, two people actually.
You can have two.
I want to thank first Trevor for finding that piano and making it happen.
Wonderful.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And then
She gets number 2. Go ahead.
And then I want to thank Tina for the beautiful music that you bring out of it.
Wonderful. You know, just let's pause on the Tina one. I see your hand and I'll get to you. Let's just take Tina, because she's musical and I really appreciate that. And the adequacy. How many years have you been practicing and playing the piano? Any idea?
Since I was 6.
Wow. Amazing. And is it an intense experience? Do you like doing it? Do you like being musical? Okay. Okay, Trevor, you had your hand up. You're the last one.
I want to thank Jesse for prodding me to get a new piano. All her fault.
Oh, and was she intense about it? You know, really nudging you?
No, just try.
So, altruism can come in short little things. Relatively short, like arranging to get a piano, and arranging to get the piano tuner, and getting the musician. But it also can be a lifelong thing of somebody developing a skill and getting better and better at it, and then sharing their gifts. So again, these 5 have been identified by Sorokin. And what I've tried to do in my book is to take the 6 different ways to serve the neighbor at the literal level, and then look at them from a Swedenborgian internal sense level. And because I like to do art, I decided to paint hands, showing what I think was going on. So, who knows what those 6 ways are to serve the neighbor? Anybody know any? Even if you don't know them in order. What's one of them?
Feeding the hungry.
Feed the hungry. That's the number 1 that is mentioned in Matthew. Who knows another one?
Visiting people in Christmas.
That's right, visiting people in prison, which is the 6th one we'll talk about tomorrow. Anybody else know any of them?
Taking care of widows and orphans.
It's actually not part of this quote, but that is mentioned many other times. But let's just say the widows are sick or the children are sick. It does mention the sickness. Okay. Yes, giving clothing to people who need it, who don't have enough clothing. Welcoming me, I'm a stranger here. Welcoming the stranger. Okay, so today we're going to briefly talk about the first 3, both at the literal level, but even more importantly at the internal level, because today we're talking about the easy ones. Tomorrow we're talking about the really hard ones. And this is where I draw again from psychology as well as from Swedenborgian theology. So here's my little painting of feeding the hungry. Why don't you take a minute to find somebody near you and just for about a minute talk about what was the most positive experience you can remember of feeding somebody. Maybe you helped make Thanksgiving dinner. Maybe you just made a pizza for somebody. Find somebody and then I'll kind of clap my hands when a minute is over. What was it like in your mind when you were feeding somebody happily? Think of an example, talk to somebody near you for a minute. Okay. Can I hear 1 or 2 examples? When you were providing food for somebody who was hungry. Can anybody think of a positive example of that? Yes.
I help organize the work weekend that we have here every Memorial weekend. And I've been making a meal for lunch on Sunday. And everyone loves it so much. And it's really labor intensive. But because they love it so much and they always tell me how much they love it, I keep making it. And so, and I've given out the recipes. But when I've given it to
Yeah, you shared the recipe.
And every year I say, I don't want to make that. I just don't want to make it because I have to stay in the kitchen for 3 hours.
The duration is killing your feet.
And yet, I really love it too.
Okay.
And everyone loves it. And and every year, someone different, or no, every year, the same people keep saying how much they love it. And then new people say, that's so good. And so I do it. And I think I do it because I know how much they love it.
They know how much they love it.
And even though it is, I'm in the kitchen for 2.5 to 3 hours.
You're aware of the duration and it's probably the adequacy. You have to have some skills in the kitchen and everything. But you're also mindful of how it's received, right? And that gives you that connection there. One more example. Yes.
Except 2 quick ones. One is every year I always make Thanksgiving dinner for whoever shows up. I enjoy doing it and I enjoy the part of it. I love it. And also on Leah and I's first date, we went for pizza. And the place we went gave me free pizza, but pizza. It's way more pizza than we did. So we stayed with the first homeless people that we saw sitting in the doorway.
Wonderful.
So I think it was something that I really needed.
They needed.
That they were going to use and stuff.
That's right. Wonderful. So, anybody know what the internal sense of feeding the hungry is? Go ahead, Hugh. You're nodding.
Yeah, that the food refers to good.
Yes. People are longing to be around goodness. Now, did anybody come to camp hoping to be in a good environment? To be around kind people? I mean, you probably came a lot of miles to come here and had to rearrange your regular lives to get here. Because you hope to be around this little heaven on earth, right? And that longing to receive goodness is very similar to the longing to come to the Thanksgiving table. So if we're the giver, we need to figure out who is longing to belong, who is longing to be loved. And what kind of kindness or love do they need? Is it a listening ear? Is it companionship? Is it empathy? Is it a hug? And as we use our understanding heart, our discernment, to try to figure out, what do I do with a 2-year-old versus George Dole? Does he need anything? Yeah, he still needs to be loved, right? Even though he's been around for 8.5 decades. He's still going strong, but I bet you some of you are going to really welcome him and bring him in here. So the point is, paying attention to the other person. What do they need? And less about, am I going to get a reward in heaven for being such a giver? The more we're paying attention and figuring it out, and sometimes people are very clear, I need a hug, and other times they're not clear. I mean, 13-year-old boys are not always very clear about what they really need. They often send out negative messages, and so we have to figure out how to love them anyway, in appropriate ways. Okay, the second one that is mentioned in Matthew 25 is giving liquid to the thirsty. So that's our literal sense, and the internal sense is giving truth. Water, of course, means truth. Most people know that one pretty easily. So I like to picture that like when somebody gets up very early in the morning around here and makes sure I have coffee at 5 a.m. and I just want to thank him. He makes a fire for me and he makes up coffee. So I am very grateful when somebody makes me coffee or brings me water when I'm really thirsty. We all know what that's like. Is anybody going to hand out water for the racers, for the Dole race? That's your job. So that's a real powerful thing because, you know, they're running around and they probably can't carry water, so handing them water as they go by, they really need it, especially if it's 95 degrees, right? So that's a wonderful thing to give liquid when people need it. It takes a little more discernment and carefulness to decide when to hand truth over to somebody, because we need to leave other people in spiritual freedom, don't we? So trying to figure out, I don't want to turn the fire hose on somebody and overdo it when they're thirsty. Just the same, I don't want to hand them 36 books or so. If they say, tell me about your religion, boom, here's all the writings of Swedenborg. So you have to figure out, what do they care about? Do they care about that you believe in an afterlife? Do they care about that marriage is important? Do they care? And then go to that and share truths. So trying to decide how much will quench the thirst, and a little bit at a time. As a professor for many years, I often had to figure out how much could I get into one class across a whole semester, across several years, and figuring out the amount of psychology ideas or Swedenborgian ideas was often my greatest challenge, and I love trying to figure that out, especially when people come from different backgrounds. At our college now, half the people were there never heard of Swedenborg when they walk in. So I have to figure out, well, what would be small bites that they might be able to, I can understand that. They may or may not agree with it, but my job is to try to share truth whenever I could.